I have always believed that the secret to raising a child who will grow up to be a millionaire is not money, but mindset. To give her not only education, but also the ability to see opportunities where others see problems. To teach her not to be afraid to take risks, but to do it wisely. And most importantly, to show by her own example that you need to work not only for money, but for a dream. I tried to raise my son Michael in this way, and later to support my grandchildren when they took their first steps in life. But, as I now understand, dreams can turn to dust if there is no room left in the heart for respect and love. My name is Albert Johnson. I am 79 years old. I live in a small house on the outskirts of Chicago. Once this house was full of laughter, children's cries, and the smell of freshly baked pies that my late wife Margaret baked. Now it is quiet. Very quiet. Sometimes the silence is so loud that I can hear the ticking of the old wall clock in the living room, which I once brought from New York after a business trip. My health is not the same anymore. My knees hurt so much that it is sometimes difficult to get out of bed. My heart reminds me of itself from time to time with a sharp tingling. I rarely go out into the city. The crowd and noise have become difficult for me. Although, to be honest, I don't really want to. In the store, salespeople look past me as if I am transparent. Young people on the street push with their shoulders without even apologizing. Even in the queue at the pharmacy, I feel someone looking at me with irritation. They say, "Why is this old man taking so long to fumble with his wallet?" And my family? My children and grandchildren used to come every weekend. We had dinner together. I told stories about my travels, about the time when I opened my first car service, which later became a successful chain. Michael always listened carefully, even wrote down some of my advice. But now they find 1,000 reasons not to come. Work, or school with the grandchildren, or some other urgent business. Calls have become rare, and conversations are short, like messages on the phone. Last week I asked my son to help me change a light bulb on the porch. He said he was busy and might be able to come by sometime next month. Months. What am I supposed to do? Sit in the dark? I had to climb the ladder myself, risking falling. That was probably the first bell that the world around me had changed, and I had become a secondary character in it. I don't complain about life. It has given me a lot. But in this new world, where everyone is in a hurry and looking at screens, there is no place for the old. We are like old books in a library, standing on a shelf, covered in dust, but still preserving pages that were once important to someone. Sometimes, when I sit by the window with a cup of hot coffee, I think about the fact that my children and grandchildren may achieve wealth. But what good will it do if they lose something more important: humanity? And then I remember my own lesson. It is not only the wallet that should become a millionaire, but also the soul. There are days when I feel like my hands remember more than my head. They still remember how to turn a wrench, feeling every movement of the metal beneath my fingers. They remember the smell of motor oil and fresh paint when I stood in my first auto repair shop, still young. I was 27, and the world seemed so big and open that even the sky was the limit. I started in a small garage in a rented space. It was cold in the winter, hot in the summer, but I didn't care. I worked 14-hour days. Margaret, my future wife, brought me lunches in an old thermos. She always laughed that my overalls had more patches than original fabric. But we were happy. We dreamed. And we knew we were building our future. I remember one day, when we didn't have enough money to pay the rent, I sold my beloved Harley-Davidson motorcycle, which I had been collecting parts for almost 2 years. It hurt, but I knew that my dream of having my own business was more valuable than any toy. 5 years later, I had 3 service stations, and 10 years later, I had my own network throughout the state. I was invited to business forums, I spoke to young entrepreneurs, and I told about the path from a poor boy from a working-class neighborhood to the owner of a profitable company. Margaret was always there. She knew how to listen and support, even when I was exhausted and irritable. We raised Michael together, and I tried to convey to him the main thing: that money should be earned not by tricks, but by work and reputation. We traveled the country. I drove them in my own pickup truck across prairies and mountain roads. We took pictures at every interesting sign or landmark. In the photo albums there is still a picture of me holding little Michael on my shoulders near the Grand Canyon, and he laughs as if only bright days were ahead of him. I also remember the times when people knew me by name. At the bank, they shook my hand. At the coffee shop, they made coffee before I even placed an order. Even strangers greeted me on the street because they had heard about my business or the charity events that we organized. Every Christmas, my employees and I collected gifts for children from disadvantaged families. And I always told Michael, "Your success is worth nothing if you can't share it with others." Now these memories sometimes hurt, because they are so vivid that the contrast with the present cuts to the heart. When I remember how we sat with friends in an old bar, drinking cheap beer and planning big things, I want to get that energy back, at least for a moment. To get back the feeling that your life is just beginning, not coming to an end. Maybe that's why I perceive the indifference that I feel now so painfully. Because I remember a time when my every word mattered. When people listened, asked for advice, valued my opinion. And I know that I haven't become worse, it's just that the world around me has changed. And those to whom I gave years of work, to whom I passed on my experience, are now hurrying on, leaving me behind. But despite everything, I am grateful for these memories. Because they remind me, I lived, I created. And even if today it seems to me that my place in the world is no longer so visible, somewhere in the past, there remained Albert, who knew how to turn dreams into reality. Perhaps the hardest thing about old age is not the illness, but the feeling that you have become invisible. People see your gray hair, but they don't see you. They see tired hands, but they don't notice that these hands once built, repaired, created. Now I often catch myself thinking that even my own children perceive me not as a person with a story, but as another problem on their list of worries. One day I invited Michael and his family to dinner. I wanted to cook their favorite dishes, baked meat with gravy and apple pie, like Margaret used to make. I got up at 5 in the morning to catch up. The stove had been working since early morning. The house was filled with smells that reminded me of my younger years. But half an hour before the appointed time, I received a short message from Michael. "Dad, I'm sorry, but we can't make it today. Lisa, my daughter-in-law, has a meeting with colleagues, the children are tired, we'll postpone it until another time." Another time never came. Another incident occurred at the pharmacy. I stood in line for a long time, holding a list of medications prescribed by the doctor. There was a young woman in front of me who was talking on the phone, and when my turn came, the pharmacist started to serve me, but after a minute I was distracted by her. She loudly asked if there was any cream in stock. I was simply pushed into the background. I stood with my wallet in my hands and felt my throat tighten. No one even apologized. The situation is even more complicated with my grandchildren. They used to ask me to tell them fairy tales, but now, when I try to talk to them, they sit with their phones, not even looking up. I once overheard my oldest grandson say to his brother, "Don't start with him, he'll start his long stories again." It affected me more than I wanted to show. I just went into the kitchen and stared out the window for a long time, pretending to check if the flowers had wilted. Sometimes I wonder if it's my fault. Maybe I talk too much about the past? Maybe they think I'm old-fashioned and uninteresting? But my advice was important to them once. They used to see me as an example. Now I'm just an old man taking up time and space. I recently called an insurance company to clarify the details of a medical plan. On the other end of the line, the young guy answered abruptly, interrupted, and spoke as if I was deliberately delaying his work with my stupid questions. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not with anger, but with sadness. I realized that society as a whole treats the elderly the same way that that boy did. We are not people to them, but obstacles. These small situations, put together, turn into a burden. They press like a stone on the heart. And sometimes I begin to doubt whether I still have the right to demand respect. But then I remember Margaret's words. A person is worthy of respect not because he is young or old, but because he is alive. And I try to hold on to these words, even when the world around me seems to forget about me. That day I woke up earlier than usual. It was a slight frost outside, and the sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky a soft pink. I decided to go to a small corner store to buy bread and milk. My knees were aching a little, but I thought the fresh air would do me good. I went into the store, picked up my basket, and slowly walked between the shelves. But as I reached for a loaf of bread on the top shelf, my legs suddenly gave out. It all happened so quickly, the feeling of the floor disappearing from under my feet, a thud, a sharp pain in my thigh. I was on the floor, and the bread had fallen next to me. People walked by, glancing at me, but no one stopped right away. Only the young cashier, seeing me, ran out from behind the counter and asked if I was okay. I tried to get up, but the pain shot through my leg until my vision went black. And then I heard one of the customers grumble, "Well, old people are just troublemakers." The words hit me harder than the fall. Not because they were new to me, but because I realized that more people think this way than I care to admit. They took me to the hospital. The diagnosis was a severe contusion and a fractured bone. The doctor said I would have to use crutches for a few weeks. I lay in the ward, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange mixture of pain and shame. It felt like I had finally turned into that old man who gets in the way. But it was in the hospital that something happened that changed the course of my thoughts. A man in his 40s was put in the next bed. His name was Jason. He was a truck driver and had an accident that would keep him out of work for several months. We got talking. He said he was afraid of running out of money, that his wife was now raising 2 children by herself. And suddenly he said, "You know, Mr. Albert, right? For some reason, I feel like you have something to teach me. You speak calmly, as if you know that even in the worst situation, a way out can be found." It struck me. In recent years, I have become accustomed to the fact that no one is interested in my words. And here is a stranger who sees in me not a burden, but an experience. And I began to tell him stories from my life, how I started a business, how I made risky decisions, how I sometimes lost, but always got up. I told him my main idea that wealth begins in the head, not in the pocket, and that even without money you can become rich if you see opportunities. Jason listened attentively, sometimes even taking notes on his phone. And at some point I realized, I am still needed. My experience can still help someone. Not everyone, but those who are ready to listen. When I was discharged, Jason shook my hand and said, "Thank you. You have changed my outlook on life. And honestly, I want my children to meet someone who will teach them things they can't find in textbooks." I came home with crutches, but also with a new thought. Maybe the problem isn't just the indifference of those around me, but also the fact that I've closed myself off. Maybe I can still give something to this world if I stop waiting for the world to come to me. After I was discharged from the hospital, I spent a few days in silence, thinking about everything that had happened. The crutches reminded me of the fall, but they reminded me even more of Jason's words. He saw in me what I had begun to forget: wisdom, experience, stories that could help others. I realized that in recent years I had stopped sharing these stories with those who were willing to listen. I tried to tell them only to my family, and it was painful to realize that they were no longer interested. But the world is much bigger than my house and my last name. The morning I decided to act, I took out an old laptop that had been gathering dust in the closet and opened a blank document. At first my hands shook, from excitement, not from old age. I began to write a memoir. Not as an autobiography of a successful businessman, but as a collection of lessons I had learned in my life. I called them 50 Ways to Think to Become a Millionaire in Your Soul and in Your Wallet. Every day I wrote a few pages, recalling stories from my youth, successes, failures, decisions that gave me an advantage. I did not embellish the truth. I wrote as it was, with mistakes, doubts, even with shame for some actions. But at the same time and with pride for the fact that I did not break. A month later, I registered at the local library as a volunteer. I offered to hold free meetings for young people, where I would share advice on finances, business, and life. The first time, only 5 people came. But after the meeting, they came up and said, "Mr. Johnson, you talk about money in a way that is not scary, and about life in a way that makes you want to act. We will come again." I began to feel that I was needed again. That my knowledge could live on, even if not through my children or grandchildren. And a strange thing happened. When Michael found out that I was giving lectures, he called me for the first time in a long time without any reason. He asked if he could come to one of them with his youngest son. I agreed. And when I saw my grandson listening attentively, writing something down in a notebook, my chest tightened but with joy. I also reconnected with some old contacts. I called Bill, my former business partner, with whom I had not spoken for more than 10 years. We met in a cafe, and I saw that he also felt unnecessary in his family. We agreed that once a month we would organize meetings for people of our generation to share their experiences with young people. I stopped waiting for respect to come by itself. I began to earn it anew, but not through money or success, but through the desire to help, teach, support. And strangely enough, I felt more satisfaction in this than I ever did from the biggest profit. Now every morning is an opportunity for me to help someone. And I know that even if the world around us is rushing by and not looking back, there are those who are still ready to hear old Albert Johnson. When I look at my life now, it reminds me of a long road with many twists and turns. There were parts where I was racing at full speed, feeling the wind in my hair and confident in the future. And there were also parts where I could barely move my legs because every step was painful. And I realized, there is no road without potholes. But how you overcome them determines who you will become in the end. I often return to the idea that I once formulated for my son, and now I want to leave it to everyone who is ready to listen. If you want to raise a child who will grow up to be a millionaire, teach him not only to earn, but also to value. To value time, people, trust, work. Teach him not to be afraid to take risks, but at the same time to remember that money is just a tool, not a goal. And most importantly, set an example for him with your own life. Because words without actions are just noise. For a long time I thought that my mission was over when the business was transferred to other hands and the children grew up. But now I understand, a person's mission is never over if they are ready to share what they know. In this world, there will always be someone who needs your advice, support, or just an honest life story. My meetings in the library have become a new breath of fresh air for me. I see in the eyes of young people the fire that once burned in me. Sometimes they ask such questions that I feel like the same 27-year-old guy again, who is not afraid to make a mistake. And when after a lecture someone comes up and says, "You changed my vision of money and life," it is more precious to me than any check. Relationships with my family have also begun to change. Not quickly, not fabulously, but changing. Michael now sometimes calls just like that, for no reason. My grandchildren have started coming to my performances. I don't entertain the illusion that we will return the past, but I see that they are starting to see me again not only as an old person, but also as someone who I was and remain. I have learned the main thing: respect does not come automatically with age, it must be earned again and again, but not through strength, but through an open heart and willingness to share. And if you yourself do not take a step towards the world will not necessarily take it first. Now I want to leave young people with one piece of advice that I once gave to Michael. If you dream of $1 million, start by becoming a millionaire in your thinking. The ability to see opportunities, respect for yourself and others, the ability to work towards a dream, this is real capital that will never depreciate. I have come a long way to understand this. And now I want to say to everyone who reads or listens to me, your value is not measured by years or money. It is measured by what you leave behind. And if at least one person becomes better because of your example, you have already lived your life for a reason. And remember my favorite phrase, which I now say to everyone as I say goodbye. Don't wait for the right moment to start living. Life begins the moment you decide to act.
Subscribe and like. And tell your friends about this video.